We're going to reconvene the county budget meetings. Our next presentation is Transportation and Development with Dan Johnson. And we have an hour scheduled for your time. And as you may recall, what we're trying to do is figure 50% of that time for the presentation and 50% of that time, or more, who knows, for questions and answers from the budget committee members. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Budget Committee. My name is Dan Johnson. I'm the Director of Transportation and Development. I have the pleasure of being joined by Deidre Landon, our Administrative Services Manager. And online is Mike Besner, our Assistant Director of Transportation, and Cheryl Bell, our Assistant Director of Development. Unfortunately, unlike past years, you're going to have to put up with me for 20-some minutes in regards to this presentation. As in this new Zoom environment, we like to spread the wealth, but that's not going to happen this year. So hopefully my voice has not drowned you out and bore you too much. I'd like to just start briefly with a discussion around transportation and development. Essentially, we actually have a total of 6 lines of business. We're only going to be discussing 5 of those today. You heard presentations for our targeted improvement area line of business, which includes the lighting district and the Clackamas County Development Agency in yesterday's proceedings. We'll be focusing today on Dtd Administration, livable communities, transportation, fleet services, a new addition to our portfolio, and land use and development. Total budget we are proposing is $184,399, $184,399,400 and that's small writing. $96. Of that, about $5 million, which is about 2.85%, is general fund. Just to give you kind of scope and scale, and we have approximately 300 employees within DTD. Next slide, please. I want to run through some major accomplishments. As you've heard from everybody, and will continue to hear, it was a very eventful year. First and foremost, we want to highlight the support and partnership we had with EOC, our Emergency Operations Center. DTD administrative staff logged over 400 plus hours working the COVID and the wildfire emergency operations centers, which was great to assist not only EOC and disaster management, but the citizens of Clackamas County. I want to highlight a couple things there, one of which is sustainability and solid waste staff spent over 1,600 hours in the EOC during the last year. A significant portion of that was focused on debris. As the manager of our sustainability and solid waste program, Evan Polk is the debris manager for Clackamas County. As you can imagine, through a forest fire and through an ice storm, we had a significant amount of debris, public and private, that we had to deal with. I also want to highlight the good work of Dog Services, who provided more than 180 hours of operations for the EOC for animal services role, basically providing evacuations and resource coordinations for thousands of domestic and livestock animals during those events. Moving on to our own emergency response. Our office continues to work with FEMA through EOC on cost reimbursements for 2020 wildfire response efforts, seeking almost $700,000 in federal funds to cover public debris removal, traffic control, signage, barricades, and culvert damage. I want to highlight a couple of pretty amazing things in partnership with EOC to help those people living in unincorporated areas of Clackamas County. And in regards to the ice storm, we developed, we believe, the first nationwide program for e-gift cards, essentially where we worked collaboratively with our tech services and EOC to develop a way to have folks apply online, which we would then push out gift cards for those individuals to take their debris to certain landfills in the Clackamas County region. Just so you know, as of April 1st, 2021, more than 955 people have received the vouchers, and approximately 239 have already been redeemed at participating vendors. Last but not least, on this slide, costs are not yet identified for the 2020 ice storm response. But it should be noted that contractor and road maintenance crews are currently still working to clear the county roads of debris, and revised estimates indicate these crews will have collected more than 20,000 cubic yards of public debris, which was stockpiled at Barton. If anybody of you need wood chips, we have a significant supply. We'd be glad to give them to you. And those efforts continue. Next slide, please. Highlighting a number of our couple of major accomplishments. I'm going to identify 3 here that are of significance, one of which is our transportation line of business, the first line there. The resources in this fund are currently working on advancing 65, I'm going to repeat that again, 65 transportation projects currently in various stages of design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction. Secondly, transportation maintenance. They performed Paving and other surface treatments, including contract paving on 18.96 miles of roadway. I want to highlight the fact that we actively bid our projects during the pandemic, which resulted in some cost savings for those projects as a whole. We got good numbers on those bids. And last but not least on this slide, development services. So proud of this group. We did not shut down. This was directed from Gary in regards to this pandemic. We continue to provide public services, development services to our public. After COVID hit in March 2020, the Development Review Group worked to create and launch a 100% digital or remote permitting and plan review process in less than 3 weeks. Our staff have responded to 584,000 development-related inquiries, which is a 60% increase from the last fiscal year. We are continuing to see permit volumes constant and or increasing, though different to some extent. Next slide, please. A couple items I'd like to highlight on this particular slide, one of which is Dtd Administration. We use these measures to kind of right-size our administrative group for the group as a whole. We take a look at the size of our operation in regards to FTE counts and also in regards to the budget we have. We strive to keep our administrative costs in check. We target 1 to 1.5% of the total budget, and I'm pleased to say that this year, our administrative service component, minus our public information coordinators, which are going to be relocated, is essentially 1% for fiscal year 21-22. Secondly, a topic that's near and dear to all of your hearts, it seems like every year, is code enforcement. I am pleased to announce that even during a pandemic, their ability to resolve code violations within 150 days of the initial complaint continues to improve. As you can see through the numbers before you today, actuals for 19-20 were 63%, projections for 2021 are 75% as we move forward. Next slide, please. Highlighting transportation engineering and construction, this is kind of our on-time, on-budget assessment, and it's amazing. We have a strategic plan to ensure, it's within our strategic plan within DTD, to ensure that we have a PCI, which is a pavement condition index rating for our roads. We have 1,400 linear miles of roads that we maintain of 70% or higher. We're at about 69 right now for that PCI. But you can see from these projects that are on here, pardon me, that's the wrong note. These projects that are on here, even during a pandemic, we had targeted 90% of our projects on time and on budget. We achieved an 87.5% threshold as it relates to the ability to deliver those projects. Number of miles resurfaced, transportation maintenance, this is where that note should have been. Strategic plan has an objective of PCI of 70 or greater. We're at 69. We had a target this year for 18.96 miles of roadway to be treated. We met that target. And I want to have a quick discussion, because it's a question that's going to come up, about the 6.94 that's here for the next fiscal year. So essentially, within this budget, we have a total paving-related work allocated dollars of about $7 million, okay? I want to make sure we're clear. That's non-capital and is part of our materials and services line within the budget before you today. The contract paving portion of that for the 6.94 miles is about $3.9 million. But what's important to understand is that we're moving from, as we assess our roadways, we're moving from a rural environment for paving to an urban environment for paving. And so we actually are doing work this year to the tune of $2.1 million to prepare our urban roads to be paved next fiscal year. Those include Sunnyside and a number of other urban roads. It's important to understand we are required by statute when we touch, in federal law, when we touch or resurface a road, we are required to upgrade all ADA components associated with that road. So essentially it takes our paving cycle from a 1 year to a 2 year, because we have to get in there a year ahead of time, update all the ADA components, and then come and pave the following year. So we have that work underway as we move forward into the next fiscal year. And I guess the takeaway, as we move from this rural to this urban, miles may go down and costs are going to be the same or may even be higher as those ADA requirements are required to be completed. I want to touch briefly on traffic safety. We do have a measure in here by 2030, an aspirational measure by 2035 to reduce the number of fatalities resulting from crashes on roads in Clackamas County to 0. Why would you assume any less? That is a target our transportation safety folks have. The numbers, it's clearly unfortunate the pandemic did not help improve this measure. We had an aspirational goal of 17. We're projecting, unfortunately, probably 28 deaths on Clackamas County roadways this year, which is a national It's a national issue that you are seeing in regards to results of the pandemic, speeds increasing, driver operations, texting, distraction. And so that's why the Board of County Commissioners have heard a couple times how we're trying to target dollars to really get messaging around there, around teen driving and other traffic-related issues in the future. Moving on, last but not least, the Community Road Fund. You can see from that bottom line the value of capital projects constructed. We are gearing those dollars up. These are the revenues collected through VRF. And we are actually leveraging those dollars as illustrated by the column above, or by the row above, pardon me. We are leveraging $1.3 million of Community Road Fund against approximately $5.8 million of other revenues. So we are leveraging and combining those dollars to get the projects out on the roads that the Clackamas County citizens like to see. Next slide, please. I'm going to focus here mostly on our land use development review and permitting. These are a couple of important measures. It talks about the value of the work that those folks are doing on the permitting end. And so if you look at the first measure, dollar value of constructed improvements permitted, you can see we have projected or targeted about $675 million. That number came in a little bit low. And to be frank, that is pandemic related. The type of, we are not seeing a reduction in the permits we are getting, but the type of permits are different. You're seeing a lot of single family residential, tenant improvement. You're seeing fewer large-scale commercial or industrial projects that are coming in. And that's a product of the times and the unknowns around what the future holds in regards to the use of that space. We do expect that number to kick up a little bit, but that's usually like a 2 or 3 year cycle until lending gets figured out, performers get figured out, and hopefully we'll see a change in that. You will see the next measure below, though. We are still constant almost on the amount of square footage that is being constructed within Clackamas County. We have projected about 6.7 million. Right now, we are projecting that we actually will achieve about 6.3 and targeting $6.4 million going into next year. This next one's pretty much unbelievable. Percentage of new single-family residential permits out within 60 days of the application. We met it and achieved our goal, 81%. Keep in mind, that's moving to a completely remote review and digital submittal software that we have right now. That's the good. The bad is the next one, because essentially you moved our interactions with the public from 375,000 as projected up to 584,000. That's a 60% increase in the interactions we're having with our community back and forth. We're assuming some of that is just some of the complexities and working through that with the digital environment, and we assume that number will come down. Last but not least on this page, this effort and discussion around budgeting and the objectives to meeting these measures has really made us kind of refocus on some of these measures, and we think there are errors in some of these targets. And this is a great example. So for example, our long-range planning group, the percentage of projects in the annual long-range planning work program completed annually. We don't have an annual long-range planning program anymore. We actually do it over a 2-year cycle. And so while we had an objective of 75%, that's almost impossible to achieve. That target needs to be around 40 or 45%. And that's something we're looking at in the future to adjust and modify. Next slide, please. So I do want to draw your attention to the row on the right, the metrics. A couple things to keep in mind about DTD strategic plan. We didn't develop it with budgeting in mind. A large majority of our objectives of goals are aspirational or reach goals, and so I think that's important to keep and consider as you look through this. Also, there was an impact in achieving some of these goals due to the 3 emergency declarations that we had. We had to reassign staff to work and support EOC and meet the needs of our citizens. And there's also no weighing of these metrics. So, for example, if you had a target to achieve 10 projects and you achieve 9, your response on here would be 0, okay? And it's something we need to take and consider as we move forward, as we develop these measures and for efficiencies. It's important to kind of draw your attention to kind of 3 different rows here, one of which is percentage of county general fund, next is restricted funding, and last is that program performed by the county. And this relates mostly to the majority of our general fund programs. You're going to see for most of these, there's a high, as you look for those that have general fund associated with it, it's a high percentage of that program is operated solely by the county. These are services that either can't be provided by somebody else or they don't want to be provided by somebody else. Majority of those also have a high public-facing service. So they're providing public services such as answering questions, things of that nature, that don't result in a return of revenue or charges for services, simply to answer questions that might be posed by the staff. Those include dog services, code enforcement, county surveyor, and our planning department, which we'll be discussing more here shortly. Next slide, please. I want to draw your attention to that transportation maintenance line because I'm assuming that's a number that's going to have some questions associated with it. So let's try to answer some of those currently. So I want to make sure that we understand, the Budget Committee is aware of the fact that we went out last year and did a bond for a transportation maintenance facility to the tune of $20 million. We actually, in partnership with the county, as they went through to restructure some debt, got a great bond rate, and we have those dollars in reserve for payment this year. That equates to approximately $20 million. Also, it's important to understand the fact that it includes Damascus Roads and our Community Road Fund dollars that are in there. But what's important to understand is by the end of fiscal year 21-22, the road fund, we are expecting that to be bought down to almost $15 million, okay? So that carryover, that ending fund balance would be about $15 million. And with that $15 million, we have commitments that we have made on other projects. And those other projects are a $1 million commitment to Abernathy I-205 Bridge, $2.3 million to Bull Run Bridge project. We've got about $5.6 million in CIP projects next year, and we'd like to keep $3 million in our for emergency purposes and response. That, in turn, essentially leaves us a surplus of about $3 million and how those dollars are being bought down this year, okay? Next slide, please. I'm going to draw your attention to our land use development review and permitting. You can see it's got about $27 million associated with it. These are highly specialized jobs. We hold about 97.9 FTE in this program. A lot of those services are cost of services. There's little general fund, but where we have the little general fund, it is providing important services for smaller work groups, which we'll discuss here in a moment. Let's see here. Next slide, please. I'm actually, graphs are great. I'm a visual person. I'm going to move on to the next slide, though, and run you line by line through our budget, if that'd be okay.
Sure.
So let's start, well, first and foremost, we just identified a question, which we have to get answered for you, and hopefully we can do that today. If not, we'll come back and respond. So if you look at the fiscal year 2021, revenue less expenditures, it's got $79 million in there. And you look at fiscal year 21-22, beginning fund balance, it's got $80 million in there. There's a discrepancy there, which we've got to figure out where that's at. And Dtd, along with her amazing budget team and finance director, are assessing that currently, and we'll try to have an answer for that today. If not, we'll come back and provide that. So let's run through federal, state, local revenues that are coming in. It's important to understand that, though this is a 14% jump, the majority of these funds are state road fund to the tune of $33 million, grants to the tune of $8 million, and other miscellaneous revenue. The single biggest increase is probably that increase to federal grants and state grants over this next year, which fluctuates on an annual basis. Next line is charges for fees. You'll see that's a 21% increase to the tune of $7.5 million. I can look at you all straight in the face and tell you we did not increase fees to the tune of $7.5 million. Basically, $4.6 million of this is a request to recognize pass-through revenues, which are collected on behalf of other agencies. So we're required to collect a 12% state business surcharge or building surcharge. We have school excises tax and others. There are some other adjustments in here that are basically just accounting related because of the chart of account changes that we saw over this last year that finance has been working on. Next is revenues from bonds. You're going to see it went down 89%. That's pretty self-explanatory. We didn't bond this year. You had a $20 million bond last year. We didn't bond this year. The majority, let's see here. Those dollars that are in there are basically associated with the reduction in the bond. I'm going to move on to all other revenue and resources at $5.9 million. Essentially, those resources are, the majority of which are planned land sale proceeds from the sale of the Abernathy site. So we are building a new transportation and maintenance facility. We are getting revenue from the sale of that property, and here's where those dollars are recognized. Other interfund transfers reduced a pretty significant amount. With COVID in play last year, we had developed kind of a backup plan for an interfund loan from SDCs if it was needed to make a payment. It was not, but we were being strategic and careful as we moved forward in this unknown future that COVID had held. General fund support, I'm going to save the discussion for general fund support. I can tell you it's flat from the year before, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. Moving over to expenses, personnel services, we have a small increase. That small, like I said, we have 300 plus employees. We have a small increase in employees, about 3.2. That's 2 in the building department, which is restricted funding, 1 in administration, which is restricted funding, and then a 0.2 increase in transportation maintenance, which is also restricted funding. Moving on to materials and services. Let's see here. We've got a 17% increase. Oh, this was a discussion around, pardon me. This was a discussion around, it's a decrease. We had positioned last year through a supplemental budget to have funds available. This is in regards to the FEMA work that was being done to position our department if we needed to have additional local revenues cover expenses and then get those dollars paid back by FEMA to the tune of 75%. So we made an adjustment there under the emergency declaration that was afforded us. It's also important that within that group, it has to contain our contracted paving work that's in there. It also includes new this year is the design and the planning work associated with our capital projects. We were requested to reallocate those dollars out of capital into that materials and services line. Last but not least is capital outlay. There's a wide, not last but not least, but along on this line, there's a wide range of capital efforts underway this year. We've got a transportation maintenance facility to the tune of $18.5 million, our capital projects to the tune of $15 million, heavy equipment, $1 million, which is down from 1.5 in prior years, and other miscellaneous capital. If you go down to special payments, essentially all of this is recognition of those pass-through dollars. So those pass-through dollars that DTD deals with, which is basically we collect, we move to other entities, that's associated with permits, and it also is associated with the VRF pass-through of the city's portion of 40% they're required by state statute to receive. Moving on to transfers. Transfers, this is kind of on the flip side of that strategic discussion we had about possibly getting an SDC loan. It's lower because we didn't need that SDC loan, but it should be noted that these numbers do represent the ability to leverage SDC dollars against other revenue on our capital program, and that's revving up. Next, reserves for future expenditures. I can tell you that 100% of the budgeted reserves are in funds that are restricted. Those primarily are transportation maintenance, building, and that's the majority of it. As to SDCs, pardon me, thank you. Contingency, you'll see we have about $34 million. 99% of that is, those budgeted are in restricted funding. We've got about $420,000 of contingency in unrestricted funds. We took a different approach, not knowing what the future holds. We did increase the transportation maintenance contingency because obviously if it is in reserves, we aren't able to activate those funds as quickly as we might like in case there's an emergency that we have to respond to and pay our money with if it may happen before a national declaration of disaster. So we have increased our contingency within our transportation line higher than it generally is. Last but not least, I have to read a statement here. You'll notice at the bottom it says revenue less expenditures, and it says $300,229 there. This table reflects that dollar amount at the end of fiscal year 21-22, and that is incorrect. In Dog Services, Program 600303, contingency was incorrectly entered in account 50000, unappropriated ending fund balance. Account 50000 should be zeroed out This will result in an increase of $300,229 to account 49997 contingency, as we noted here in these proceedings. Next slide, please. So just two things I want to draw to your attention here. If you look at the far, I want to say the second to the right column, you'll see that our total budget has increased at the very bottom row, increased by about 3.53%. The majority of that is simply an increase in the pass-through dollars that we are passing through to other entities. That is the majority of those dollars that we have. Looking at the far right column, you can see that our general fund increase is 0. And that general fund equates to about 2.85% of our total authorized budget that we're presenting for you today. Next slide, please. Now, for job preservation, I want to make sure I'm pretty clear about this. I'm just highlighting a discussion around the fact that difficult decisions had to be made last year, and they were a reasonable decision around general fund programs. And everybody took some level of general fund cut to some extent. Things that we're dealing with, I mean, obviously in fiscal year 2021, DTD programs took an agreed upon general fund cut of about 14.22%. That was magnified a little bit by some of the general fund distribution methodology to about 17.38. And some other takebacks were done. And that's fine, it's great. But we have programs that rely on those dollars. That's mainly planning, dog services, traffic, our traffic safety group, code enforcement, and county surveyor. We need to have a discussion with our Board of County Commissioners in the near term to have a dialogue around how we advance those programs and either what additional general fund may come forward, which I don't believe that is probably an option, or what changes in services we'd like to see within those programs. And I'm just vetting this with this group to say that we need to have a discussion with our board first. We have a number of options available, vet those with our board, and then we would look to probably approach the budget committee at one of your quarterly meetings to kind of update you on some of those decisions that were made. In addition, we have our transportation maintenance facility. Obviously, we're looking to relocate, and a large majority of that work should be underway this year, and with a number of payments that are going out, plus we have the land sale proceeds we'll be receiving, which will help offset that cost. That was a lot, but I think it was under my time. And
are you causing the rain?
And Noah's Ark out here.
You're
it's
done.
great. Yeah. It's just,
Rain?
we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Green Earth. Whoa.
So talking about our transportation maintenance facility, it could flood right now because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta go move stuff out
Yeah,
of here.
gotta go move stuff out.
You got Jan Lee, and then Sean, and then Tom Feely. Jan.
Did you call him? Okay. I just had one question in regard to the account for fees and licensing, that 43 million. I wondered if you have kind of a ballpark figure or idea how much of that was from the license fee that was adopted by the county a couple years ago.
The increase, the delta, do we have that? It's live, it's on.
This is on, oh, yeah, that's what you were telling me.
I told you it
No
was live.
light. Sorry. Deidre Landon, DTD Administrative Services Manager. So the question was, how much revenue is forecasted for the local vehicle registration fee, and maybe how much of an increase are we anticipating? Would you like both of those?
Thank you, yes.
Okay, so we're estimating $11,316,000 for this upcoming budget year, and it's important to note that that also includes the 40% that gets sent out to cities. DTD is responsible for managing that whole program and distributing it out to the cities, so that's 100% of the collections. And that's an increase of about $595,000 from what we anticipated this year, mostly probably due to the reduction in receipts because of the COVID delays.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Ms. Caldwell, and then Mr. Feely.
Thank you. I just had a couple questions. The first one actually is a comment. This gets back to what I was talking about this morning about using the amended budget instead of the adopted budget. I went online and looked at the 2021 budget for your department, and it was a total of 167 million. So the difference between 167 and 184 is a lot bigger than going from 178 to 184. So to the normal citizen picking up the document, they're not necessarily going to see clearly that something big happened during 2021. And that's just my point in choosing the amended budget instead of the adopted. Those questions should be called out. The second thing I wanted to ask, Dan, and maybe this is some of what you were talking about with general fund issues going forward. In your significant policy and/or financial issues page, you talk about formulas have been put in place to further reduce support levels, and the newly implemented general fund distribution formula. I'm not familiar with that. Could you talk a little bit about what
Yeah.
that is and how that's going to impact you going forward?
Okay.
Sandra Montoya, Budget Manager. So I want to say it was probably in October, November, December, we shared with the Budget Committee that we were implementing a new calculation for general fund support for all of the departments that receive general fund support. So in the past, whatever the general fund support level was that was budgeted was given in increments throughout the year, but at 100%, regardless of any budgetary savings that a department or program was experiencing. So for example, when we put together the budget, let's say a program is slated to have 10 employees, but just through attrition, normal, they end the year with only 6. They have a savings throughout the year, and that savings, although it was realized by the department, the general fund wasn't receiving any benefit from that savings because it was giving 100%. So what we did in response to the forecast from 3 years ago showing depletion of general fund dollars, we made a change in that calculation, and the change now says when we calculate the distribution, we're going to look at expense, and we're going to calculate it as a percentage and prorate the general fund support accordingly. So if the department or the program only expends at 90%, the general fund support is given at that 90% level.
Are you talking about projecting into the future what their support level will be, or are you talking about providing the support at whatever level is required during that year?
Well, I guess it's a little bit of both. The calculation is done based on actuals, so it doesn't impact the future. However, I believe that in Dan's presentation, he's talking about as they're looking out, as they're forecasting for their department programs, they're having to take into consideration this change in methodology.
So are you changing the appropriation out of the general fund, or are you talking about, cash payment?
So we are not changing the appropriation. The departments are still able to budget at the level, at the full level. But we are, when we do the calculation, we're taking into account the actual expenses.
And Dan, could you talk a little bit about how that going forward could impact your general fund program?
So simply all that it does is that it engages, as the board and county administrator and our budget committee, our budget and finance folks wanted. It's a discussion that essentially reduces our year-end carryover, which then allows us to have a discussion with our budget committee. If we need additional general fund in certain programs, we're vetting that discussion here with you. And so historically, we've had carryover within our programs where we internally have been able to kind of look at, okay, on our 5-year forecasts, where is that money needed? And we've been carrying that money. And now that money is no longer there, and that's not a bad decision. I'm just making sure we're clear here. They wanted more transparency from this budget committee on if there's additional general fund ask, and if it was you were comfortable in giving that. So it does result, it's basically an actuals. I mean, here's the actual money you spent, and if there was some savings somewhere, here's what you needed to operate your fund, and which is fine. That's not a big deal. But it does impact our ability internally within the department on a long-range 5-year forecast to see where we can use those dollars to move in.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Feely, and then Christina has someone in queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had some questions on that same sheet that Ms. Coldwell's talking about. So we're talking about real dollar reductions. I mean, if you're talking about having to cut service or get additional general fund revenue, right?
Again, I want to make sure the intent is simply to plant this seed about a discussion. And it's things that we are facing, but it is a honest discussion around a reduction in service.
Right.
And we have to look, and we have reduction plans within our various programs, a discussion we have to have with our board to see if that's the areas they'd like to see reduced.
Okay, and then I guess I have a follow-up for Sandra. When you look at salary savings or other savings in a given year and then adjust their general fund allocation, are you looking at whether those savings are one-time in nature or ongoing? Because it sounds like you're just assuming they're ongoing.
So, for
isn't
example, like in the
necessarily the
general
case.
fund support this year, when we looked at it, we didn't go in with assumptions of any reductions. We actually, the assumption was that it was going to remain flat.
Okay. Well, you've confused me, so I'll stop.
Okay. All right, Christina?
Yes, Ann Lee has her hand raised.
Thank you. Hey, Ann, you're
Yeah,
on.
yes, I just have a question. So on page 5, showing results measure, and under traffic safety line business, you have by 2035 reduced the number of fatality resulting from crashes on road. I'm just curious what factors you consider to come up with those numbers.
So the measure itself is obviously is aspirational, and it took a lot of dialogue and discussion with the development of this particular measure. And so when you look at that measure, what they've done is you'll see the measure reads by 2035, reduce the number of fatalities resulting from crashes on roads in Clackamas County to 0. We were trying to take an incremental reduction of that throughout the years to it, and that's kind of where we landed on that 17. I'm not sure, Dee, do you want to expand on that at all?
I mean, I could. I think if the question was related to kind of how do we land on that data, you often have to look at where your data is coming from. And so we partner with ODOT to actually receive that data because they report that out quarterly, I believe it is. I don't think it's monthly. And so that's where we're actually getting the data from, and we're partnering with them to find out, what's causing these fatalities, what are our opportunities to maybe target some investments if you're seeing a trend, so that you can try to reduce that type of fatality if you're seeing that it's coming through.
I also want to expand on that. The intent, I mean, you'll see it in the measure. It's crashes on roads in Clackamas County. That includes roads that we control and that we invest safety improvements on, and it includes roads that we don't, meaning like ODOT, other jurisdictional roads. We thought it important to collect the totality of that data when we report this information out. I will tell you that we've got traffic safety investments over the next 5 to 7 years that are in the neighborhood of 12 million plus that we're looking to invest on Clackamas County roadways to ensure a safer environment for the citizens of Clackamas County.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, Commissioner Salas, and then Chair Smith. Thank you.
Yeah, so Dan, I actually had the same question on the same page 5. And it doesn't read right, so I want to make sure what I'm reading is what I'm reading. So on the first part, the first column under that same line, by 2035, reduce the number of fatalities, that first number there is 26. That was the 1920 actual. And the target was a reduction. So the 17, those were actually deaths, right? Okay?
The 26 is, correct.
And the 17 is a desired.
It's our hopeful in trying to trend that nuance down.
And then so 2021 projected performance is 28, right? So then I go to the last column and it says the target is a higher number?
Didn't we correct that? Mike Besner, are you on the phone?
Call her Lifeline.
Yeah, Lifeline.
I'm on Zoom.
Perfect.
So I understand your comment, and maybe the 31 should be lower, frankly, if I'm just being honest. The numbers obviously went up a lot this year during COVID, and when we worked as a group and looked at regional and nationwide projections of where the numbers are going, we didn't want to put a higher number. Like Dan mentioned, even the 17 was aspirational because under our drive to zero, we wanted to show a progress towards zero that we would need in order to achieve it. And it wasn't achievable for sure this year. So, you know, that's what the target was based on. I guess I don't have the best answer for you other than we looked at projections, where things were headed, and that was our best guess on where it was headed to. So rather than be aspirational, and the county has taken a different approach on the MFR measures, where aspirational measures really aren't what we need anymore. It's ones where we're actually setting targets that we think might actually happen. That's where it came from. We're still investing all the money that Dan mentioned and doing everything we can. We have an incredibly robust traffic safety program, and we're still targeting to make that number as low as possible.
Yeah, I just want to just say, I don't like the way it reads. I'll just be honest with you. I mean, the 26 to 17, okay, that's a reduction. But, you know, to say that our target is to have 17 deaths in and of itself is a problem. Or that have a target anything but zero, right, is just doesn't read right to the reader. But to have the number go the wrong way is even more problematic when it's projected the other way. I understand that's the forecast, right? But I just don't like the way it reads, and that just jumped out to me the first time I saw it. I appreciate your explanation, but
We can take a look at it. But I guess I'd draw your attention to sheet 8 on the slide deck. Let's talk about their measures, because if you look there, that's traffic safety, and their metric is 0. And so when you start, if you start talking, they're having a discussion around, you know, and maybe these aren't the right measures, and we have to talk about what those measures are, but if you look at that, one was around the fatalities on Clackamas County roads. They didn't achieve that. They have control, but the pandemic as a whole, nationwide trends, we're seeing more fatalities on our roadways, so they didn't achieve that objective. The second was, for example, and I think the second one was signal enhancements. They had proposed to do 10 signal enhancements to improve safety. They got 8 done because of the pandemic. And so nothing, like I said, they're aspirational, they're desirable. We want to push our staff to go do certain things. And when you look at this document, it's 0. And so we're kind of wrestling with that. It's like, what's a reasonable number? I will tell you, they have a heartfelt passion to achieve that objective, to get to 0, and they wrestled with what that number is, and no other number is okay except for 0. But again, I appreciate, we actually talked about that internally when we were looking through this presentation about the 31, and there needs to be more discussion around that.
Yeah, I don't know what to expect out of that. I'd love to have that discussion sometimes, but I just want to say in general, I think my struggle with this, because I'm talking to Gary when I say this really, is that in my previous roles as an elected official and even as a business owner, you know, we were deeply involved with setting those metrics, every one of them. So it wasn't set by staff or a consultant with staff and so on. It was set by all of those, including the board of directors, right, in my previous roles. And I just say that I know there's a lot of metrics. I know that's a lot of work. I know we do some review of those at a higher level, but you know, that's one I'm sure that would have jumped out at me then. You know, and of course this year it did see these numbers going the wrong way, but I don't know. I hope we can get in front of that. Does that mean that because of COVID there was more pedestrian activity and therefore these are pedestrian related?
No,
or
there's
is it
more
because
high
of
speed,
because of the higher speeds because of less vehicles on the road?
Driving,
yeah,
is what they saw as a nationwide trend. Yep. And I guess
Yeah, it happened everywhere.
to speak, I don't have to speak on behalf of Administrator Schmidt. They did a very thorough review of our plan this last year. They actually vetted that plan through a internal task force of seasoned MFR individuals, and it resulted in some significant changes. That one probably didn't come to light, and we can discuss that one more, though.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas and Chair Smith.
Thank you, Dan. You mentioned a 17% reduction. Is that general fund reduction?
That was amount of general fund, make sure I get this right, distributed this year, that was realized, because it was actual dollars. So there was an agreed upon reduction of 14%. There were savings found within our organization, which resulted in the fact that only a smaller amount of general fund had to be allocated to our departments to meet the need, which resulted in about a 17% reduction.
I direct your attention to page 15.
16, 16?
1515.
15, thank you.
And it lists your divisions within your department. And I see funding measures on them, but I also see in the yellow, sometimes there's general funds allocated to those and sometimes not.
Correct.
Okay, and so the funds that are not in yellow are other funds, other funding resources, correct?
Correct.
So it would not be within the purview, well, I'm just guessing, I don't know, would it be in the purview of this committee to consider anything that was not a general fund? So we could only consider anything in the yellow boxes. Is that correct? If we were to continue?
Help me understand that.
Okay. Let's say you said this board needs a discussion in the near future on continuing on the path that you're on program reductions. Okay, I look at it as general fund versus other funds on this page. That's how I'm trying to make sense of this in my finite mind here, okay?
I got you.
So, I see some yellow boxes are general funds. I see what's not written on here as other funds.
Correct.
So the other funds, I'm assuming, come from other sources in the universe.
Correct.
We may not want to cut the other funds in the universe. I don't know. I'm asking that. That's how I'm going to look at this going forward.
No, and that's a great question. A number of the other funds are restricted in what they are using. Mm-hmm. And so that's where a lot of the limitations come into play. So for example, the ability to use building services funds who have a high contingency and a high reserve right now because of their permitting volume, the ability to use that to, say, fund our planning department.
Correct.
There's limitations on the ability to do that.
Well, we would not want to limit our building funds that come in to the building department because that is income.
Correct.
What we would want to look at is then the general fund distribution to each department. I'm assuming, is that what you're asking us to do in the future?
That's a discussion we need to have in the dialogue around the services that we provide.
Because I could point to several departments right here that we could make a decision on, or we could or could not, for instance. I'm not going to single them out right now. But I don't know if that's, because we need a quantitative measure to look at it going forward. And I'm going to use page 15 of your budget presentation in part to do that. Deidre, would that be fair?
Yes, that's, in fact, it's funny, this is the page that I rely on the most when you talk about our budget. And I think that I want to make sure the budget that's going forward this year is balanced, as Gary said. This is a dialogue between now and looking at next fiscal year, and what that looks like. And I want to make sure, if there's any employees listening, we have a number of different scenarios we can talk to the board about changing services, how we deliver service, things of that nature. There's just things that we've been thinking about to be strategic about this discussion going forward. Because I was very frank with Gary, I said, I doubt there's going to be the ability to give us more general fund.
No.
And so how do we talk about that, and how do we move that forward?
So 17% equals how many dollars?
Oh, the general fund?
Yeah. I've got one contact, or my glasses are all fogged. 17% of 5 point.
Looks like about 895,000.
895,000, but some of that was made previously to today, is that correct?
Not of that. The 17% reduction was happening on the current year transfers. Is that what you mean? That wasn't applied to anything that was in a fund balance?
The dollars that you see in this budget was the allocation is the same as last year.
Yes.
The distribution last year was lower because those funds weren't needed to fund those programs because of savings we may have had elsewhere.
So it could be less than 17%.
It could, at
It
the
could
end of
be
the year.
less, as we're moving forward, it could, the reductions could be less than 17%.
Yep.
Is that fair?
In the
Agreed.
current
Sandra
year.
says yes.
Yeah, so in the current year, let's say that they have a program that expends 97%, and they receive general fund support, they would receive general fund support at the 97%.
Okay.
So that 17% reduction that they had in those programs last year means that they had an equivalent savings in their program of 17%.
Can I make one point of clarification? So that, when we say 17%, it's essentially 3% more than the 14.2% budget cut we had agreed to. Does that make sense? So it's not
Yes.
17 more.
Yes, it does, it
Okay.
does, because the 14% was also mulling around in my mind, but I didn't want to complicate more stuff here.
And we
Okay.
achieved that through, we had some positions we didn't fill, that we basically cut those positions, and a number of other cost-saving measures that were in place.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
And Chair Smith, one other
Yes.
thought, if you're going to be looking at these different slides to maybe have that comparison and conversation, slide 17 might be a better one because it's a little easier to call out those really restricted funds, like system development charges, where.
You said page 17.
Page 17. Because it does it more by fund, and it would be easier to identify which of these columns are extremely restricted and couldn't go anywhere versus what might have a little more flexibility.
You also see within that, there are certain programs that rely, although the program as a whole the line of business is large, we have certain smaller programs that do rely heavily on that general fund discussion. And that page will articulate that discussion a little bit more.
Yes, I see that from that. There are some programs that are heavily reliant on general fund. I would direct our board's attention to those and start thinking about those. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Feely?
I just have a quick clarification. Chair Smith, you asked if only the general fund was under the purview of the Budget Committee. And actually, all the revenues are under the purview of the Budget Committee, but it gets into issues of fungibility. You can't necessarily take a restricted dollar out of Dan's budget and use it for something non-transportation related, or you can't take a grant dollar and use it to fund the sheriff when it's a parks grant or something like that, so. it's
Well,
kind of
no,
a-
I think you misunderstood what I was saying. I didn't say that at all. What I said was that the 17% reduction would come from the general fund, not what the allocations. I was asking the allocations, I was trying to identify where the funds outside general fund came from.
Okay, I was responding to an earlier comment, but that's fine.
Okay. I have just a curiosity question, if I may. Back on page 4, where you mentioned the metric numbers for neighborhood livability projects. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and what is a neighborhood livability project? Is that an old burned house and you're getting it down, or is it
Kind of all the
a
above.
hoarder and, how does that
Kind of
work?
all the above. So this measure came around when we started looking at marijuana revenue that was coming in. And the discussion was around the fact that the distribution of those dollars, they had distributed those across a number of different departments, DTD being one for code enforcement, CCSO, the sheriff's office being another, and the district attorney's office. And the board at the time directed that discussion around, and these entities agreed that we should partner on these trouble properties, for lack of a better word. And these are your repeat offender properties that are vacant, have maybe someone's occupying them illegally, maybe there's a solid waste issue. You can imagine, you've seen it around our community here recently. And so basically, we felt it was important, as we were allocated those dollars, to make sure we were tracking kind of the neighborhood livability projects that we have. This is a trend you really want to see go down. I mean, you want to work yourself out of business on this trend. This is not something, as with the fatalities discussion. And so it actually, this is one of those measures that, again, in the middle of a pandemic, is impressive that we had 20 of these, or projected to have 20 of these this year, which means we're still communicating and partnering with our other agencies, essentially bringing all of our expertise in our various areas to one particular piece of property to resolve that issue.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was envisioning what some of that might be, and you're right on, where I was thinking, so I appreciate that I have that knowledge now. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Are there any other questions of that? If not, we thank you for, excuse me, Tootie? Oh, yeah, I probably left it.
Turn me off.
I turned you off. I got to get used to these buttons. I tell you, wow, a little bit different, this year than others.
Chair, I
Thank you
guess
so
I'd ask
much. It's good to see both of you.
Thank you so much, Chair. I guess I'd ask one question of Elizabeth to kind of clarify. So is it the intent that our office comes back to address that year-end carryover discrepancy, or will you guys be addressing that? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
No, so the budget team will be reaching out behind the scenes after this meeting. We'll figure out what the correction needs to be. We'll jot it down and then report it back to the board.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.